What if every region had Titan Pokemon? In Paldea, there are 5 giant, strong Pokemon known as Titan Pokemon. These Pokemon play a role in the story involving the Herba Mystica, a plant from Area 0 with mysterious properties. The Titan Pokemon found in Paldea are Cloth, Bombirdier, Orthworm, Great Tusk and Iron Treads, and Tatsugiri and Dondozo. But what if every region had 5 Titan Pokemon of their own? Let's find out. Before we get into the Pokemon themselves, there are a few ground rules that need to be laid out first. In Paldea, there is a story event tied to each of the 18 types. The Titan Pokemon use the Rock, Flying, Steel, Ground, and Dragon types, while both the Gym Leaders and Team Star Bosses use the remaining 13 types. So, for each region, the Titan Pokemon will have to be types that aren't represented by Gym Leaders or other notable trainers. It should be noted that the Titan Pokemon do share types with the Elite Four, which is done to also have a trainer actually representing each type as well, even if the Titan Pokemon didn't exist. In other regions though, the evil team doesn't have 5 different type specialists like the Paldea region does, so instead of ignoring the Elite Four, I'll be using the types that aren't used by the Gym Leaders or Elite Four members. You might notice that 8 Gym Leaders and 4 Elite Four members per region leaves me with 6 types, but only 5 Titan Pokemon to fill, but we'll cross that bridge when we get there. The second criteria is that each of the Pokemon is native to Paldea, which is pretty straightforward. Every Pokemon I pick will be native to the specific region. The third rule I noticed is that each of the Titan Pokemon are single-staged Pokemon, meaning they don't have any pre-evolution or evolution, so I'll be choosing those if possible. Though you'll notice that sometimes that doesn't work out, so I'll need to work with what I got. Finally, because of Great Tusk and Iron Treads, I'll try to make a version-exclusive Titan for each region, and maybe a double feature like Tatsugiri and Dondozo, but I'm not being super strict on those. The last little thing I'll note is that most of the Titan Pokemon are single-typed rather than double-typed, so I'll try to prioritize those if it fits the other criteria mentioned. With all that said though, let's start off with Kanto. Kanto has the gym types of Rock, Water, Electric, Grass, Poison, Psychic, Fire, and Ground, and the Elite Four types Ice, Fighting, Ghost, and Dragon. This leaves the types Normal, Flying, Fairy, Bug, Steel, and Dark as our options. I can only use 5 of these of course though, so I decided to cut the Dark type. The Dark type was released after the original Kanto games, but none of the original Kanto Pokemon ever gained the Dark type, unlike Steel and Fairy. You could argue that you could use a Dark-type form like Alolan Raticate, but since Alola actually uses regional forms in its own boss battles, the Totem Pokemon, I decided that new forms count towards the region they belong to, not the original. Now, since Kanto is a linear region, not an open one like Paldea, the Titan Pokemon need to be placed at specific points in the story where you can fight them at the correct level. The first Titan would be the Fairy Titan, Mr. Mime. Mr. Mime is the only native fairy Pokemon in Kanto that doesn't have a pre-evolution. At least, not in its original generation. I mean, in Let's Go, you can't get Mime Jr., so I'm playing by those rules. The second Titan is the Bug Titan, Pinsir. Pinsir is a pure bug type and doesn't have an evolution or pre-evolution, so it's actually a perfect fit for a Titan Pokemon. I also want to quickly add that I'm not taking Mega Evolutions into account at all, so don't worry about that. The third Titan is the Normal type, Tauros or Kangaskhan, depending on the version you're playing. The fourth Titan is the Steel Titan, Magneton. It's the only Kanto Steel type. I have nothing else to say. And the fifth Kanto Titan is the Flying Titan, Aerodactyl. This could have also been Farfetch'd, but I mean, come on. I laugh. Mr. Mime would be found on Route 11, where it can be caught in Let's Go Pikachu and Eevee. Pinsir would be found on Route 14, where it can also be caught in the Let's Go games. Tauros and Kangaskhan would be found as a sort of boss of the Savari Zone, which I think would be fun. Magneton would be inside the power plant, and Aerodactyl would be blocking the entrance to the Seafoam Islands, having escaped from Cinnabar Island after being revived from Old Amber. In Johto, the types not being used are Grass, Fire, Water, Ground, Electric, Rock, and Fairy. The only time of all the generations where I have 7 types to choose from. This is because Johto, for some reason, has 2 fighting type specialists, that being Chuck and Bruno at the same time. I decided to cut the fairy type this time because it was already a Titan Pokemon for Kanto, and normally I wouldn't really care about this, it wouldn't really matter, but since Kanto and Johto are so connected, I think this is a fair exception. I decided I wanted to keep the Fire, Water, Grass core just because that's always fun, so it was between Ground, Rock, and Electric. In the end though, I decided to cut the Electric type, and I'll explain why in a second. For the Water type, I chose Qwilfish. It fits all the criteria. Corsola also fits all the criteria, but since there's already a Rock type Titan, I didn't want to overlap the types. For the Fire type, I chose Houndoom. The other equally bad candidate was Magcargo, but again, I didn't want that Rock type. For the Grass type, I chose Blossom. Sunflora could have also worked, but if you took away Blossom's connection to Kanto, it would be a single-stage Johto Grass type. For the Rock type, I chose Shuckle, which is another perfect contender. Corsola would work here too, but again, I didn't want that overlap with the Water type. And Shuckle gives me Orthworm vibes anyway, so it works pretty well. Finally, for the Ground type, I chose Donphan. In fact, I chose the Ground type over the Electric type because of Donphan. Both Ground and Electric didn't have perfect candidates, but what Ground does have is a reference to two of the OG Titan Pokemon, that being Great Tusk and Iron Treads. Qwilfish will be found on Route 32, Blossom will be found in the National Park, Shuckle would be found on Route 40, Houndoom would be found rampaging in the Safari Zone, and finally, Donphan will be found on Route 45. On to Hoenn, and we actually only have 5 types to start with, since the champion, Steven Stone, is a Steel type specialist. The types we get to use are Grass, Poison, Bug, Fairy, and Ground. For the Grass type, Tropius works absolutely perfectly with no other competition. For the Bug type, Volbeat and Illumise work perfectly and would be version exclusives. For the Fairy type, Mawile is yet again a perfect single stage option. And for the Poison type, we get to have a little fun. Seviper works perfectly, but I think Zangoose would also be part of the battle, mirroring the Tatsugiri and Dondozo fight. And finally, for the Ground type, there were no good options, so I gave it to Flygon because, of course, Flygon deserves the love. The first Titan you face would be Mawile in Granite Cave, then Volbeat or Illumise on Route 117, Tropius on Route 119, Flygon on Route 111, and Seviper and Zangoose on Route 114. On to my favorite region, the Sinnoh region, and we have the normal, flying, dragon, dark, poison, and fairy types to choose from. I decided to cut the dragon type this time because you fight both Cynthia's Garchomp and either Dialga, Palkia, or Giratina, which are all dragon types, so I feel like it gets enough love in this region. For the fairy type, it was between Mime Jr. and Togekiss, so obvious pick for Togekiss there. For the flying type, I chose Chatot because it's a perfect single stage option. For dark, I chose Spiritomb because, again, it's a perfect option for that type. For poison, I chose Toxicroak. It's not a perfect option, but it had a few things going for it. The other Pokemon that could have worked are Roserade, Skuntank, and Drapion. I didn't choose Roserade though because it's already Gardenia's ace Pokemon, and Skuntank and Drapion both have the dark type, which overlaps with Spiritomb. Finally, for the normal type, I decided to go with Licky, which has actually been the hardest choice of the entire video so far. There are no perfect normal types in this region to go with, aside from Chatot, but it's already the flying Titan. It was a toss-up between Licky, Porygon Z, Lopunny, Bibarel, Ambipom, and Purugly. Porygon Z is kind of special and weird, so I decided not to use it. Bibarel is part water type, and even though dual types are fine, I wanted to stick to monotypes if possible. Purugly is Mars's ace, so I ruled it out, and then it was down to Licky, Ambipom, and Lopunny. Even though I said I'm not counting Mega Evolutions earlier on, I decided to cut Lopunny because it has one, just because I needed some kind of reasoning to get rid of it, so there you go. And finally, out of Licky and Ambipom, I just thought that Licky would look better as a Titan Pokemon, so that was what I went with. Chatot would be found in Eterna Forest, Togekiss would be found as a boss in Amity Square, Spiritomb would of course be found at the Hollowed Tower, Toxicroak would be found in the Great Marsh, and Licky would be found at Lake Valor. Unova is the only region that gets featured twice in this video, because the type specialists between Black and White and Black 2 and White 2 are so different. Starting with Black and White though, the types we get to choose from are Fire, Water, Grass, Rock, Fairy, Poison, and Steel. Now, Unova is weird because the first gym leader is either a Fire, Grass, or Water specialist, meaning if we take all 3 away, there would only be 4 types left rather than 5. Luckily, since Black 2 and White 2 are sequels to these games, we can connect them a little bit. Black 2 and White 2 happen to have a new Water-type gym leader, Marlin, so let's let Water be a Titan Pokemon in Black and White, and Fire and Grass can have their time in Black 2 and White 2. So that leaves us with Water, Rock, Fairy, Poison, and Steel for Black and White. For the Water type, I chose Alola. It could have been Basculin too, but since Basculin just got some love with Basculegion, I figured I should give Alola some love too. For the Poison type, I chose Garbodor. Unlike Scolipede and Amoonguss, Garbodor is pure poison, making it the best poison candidate. For Steel, I chose Durant, which is the only perfect Steel option. For Fairy, I was forced to go with Whimsicott, because it's the only Unova Pokemon that got the Fairy type. Except for Mega Audino, of course. And finally, for Rock, I decided on Gigalith because, like Garbodor, it's single type, so it's got an edge to other rock types. Whimsicott would be your first Titan and would be found in Pinwheel Forest. Garbodor would be found on Route 5 next to Nimbasa City. Gigalith would be found in Mistralton Cave. Alomomola would be in the water on Route 17, and Durant would be in the middle of Victory Road, to make it even harder. Black and White 2 gained both a Water type and Poison type gym leader, Marlin and Roxy, so those are off our Titan roster. They also lost an Ice type gym leader, Bryson, so with those changes we can add in the Fire, Grass, and Ice types to the selection. That leaves us with Rock, Fairy, and Steel though, so I'll have to get rid of one. I decided to get rid of Steel because Colress appears in this game, and even though he's not a gym leader or Elite Four member, he's definitely still a prominent type specialist in this game. With those 5 types said, for the Fairy type is once again Whimsicott, which I think is okay because Black and White and Black and White 2 have some similarities and some differences. The other carryover will be Gigalith for the Rock type. For the Fire type, I chose Heatmor and Durant, which isn't only a perfect candidate for the Fire type, but also builds off of and would be more difficult than the final Titan of the first games, that being Durant by itself, and is again kind of like Tatsugiri and Dondozo. For the Grass type, I chose Maractus, the only perfect Grass type, and finally for the Ice type, I chose Cryogonal, which again is perfect and fits all of the criteria. Whimsicott would again be found in Pinwheel Forest, Maractus in the Desert Resort, Gigalith in Mistralton Cave, Cryogonal in the Moor of Isserus, and Heatmor and Durant again in the Victory Road, to make it extra hard. For Kalos, we have the Dark, Normal, Flying, Poison, Ghost, and Ground types. I decided to cut out the Dark type though, because it already gets some representation both in Team Flare and also with Yveltal being a Dark type. For the Normal type, I chose Furfrou, which is a perfect candidate for a Titan Pokemon. For Flying, I chose Hawlucha, which again is perfect. Trevenant and Gourgeist are not perfect, but would be decent version exclusives for the Ghost type. Dragalge is the only new Poison type, and besides Zygarde, Diggersby is the only new Ground type, so there you go. Furfrou would be found on Route 6, having escaped from Parfum Palace. Hawlucha would be on Route 10. Dragalge would be in the water at the Azure Bay. Trevenant or Gourgeist would be in the Lost Hotel, and Diggersby would be in the Pokemon Village, because using an early game Pokemon at the end of the game is super poetic. In my region of subscribers, I'm missing you, your girlfriend, your brother, your mom, your grandma, and your dog. But most importantly, I'm missing you. So do me a favor and click that subscribe button to see more Pokemon content from me. For the Alola region, we have the Bug type, Steel type, Poison type, Dragon type, Psychic type, and Ice type to choose from. Since we have Molayne, who's a Steel type specialist in Sun and Moon and Ultra Sun and Moon, I decided to cut the Steel type from both sets of games. In Sun and Moon, the Bug type would be either Araquanid or Rabombi, depending on the version. There are no perfect Bug types in the game, and with Golisopod being Guzma's ace, and Vikavolt already being a Totem Pokemon in Sun and Moon, these were the only 2 options I really had. For Psychic, I chose Bruxish, which works perfectly. For Ice, I chose both Alolan Ninetales and Alolan Sandslash. Since there are no perfect ice types for Titan Pokemon, I think this would be a great way to show off Alolan forms. For poison, I chose Toxapex. Again, this Pokemon isn't a perfect fit, but since Salazzle is already a totem Pokemon, this is the only poison option left. And finally, for Dragon is either Drampa or Turtonator, depending on if you have Sun or Moon. These are perfect Dragon Titans. Araquanid and Ribombee would both be found in the lush jungle, Bruxis would be found at the secluded shore, Ninetales and Sandslash would be found at Mount Lanakila, Toxapex would be found in Melemele Sea, and Turtonator or Drampa would be found on the Ancient Pony Path. For Ultra Sun and Ultra Moon, the Bug-type Titan would be Vikavolt instead, since it's no longer a totem Pokemon in those games, but Araquanid and Ribombee would become totem Pokemon. And finally for today is the Galar region. The Galar region leaves us with the normal, flying, bug, ground, electric, and poison types. This time I decided to cut the poison type though. This is because we do technically get a poison type specialist in Clara, but also because Eternamax Eternatus is kind of like a Titan Pokemon boss battle already, and it of course is poison type. For the normal type though, I decided to go with Indeedee, which is a perfect normal type candidate, and would be male or female depending on the version. Sandaconda would be the ground type Titan because of its monotype. Pincurchin would be the electric Titan, also as a perfect contender. The third perfect option would be Cramorant for the flying type. And finally, for the bug type would be Orbeetle, since both Frostmoth and Senscorch are used by gym leaders already. Indeedee would be found at Giant Seat, Sandaconda at the Dusty Bowl, Orbeetle in the Glimwood Tangle, Pincurchin on Route 9, and Cramorant back on Route 2, since it can eat all the Aerocuda there. Thank you so much for watching this video, and let me know if you agree with my picks. While you're down there in the comments, make sure you like and subscribe too. After that, check out some of my other Pokemon content, and make sure you follow me on Instagram at Domadoodle_YT. Until next time though, mwah, bye bye.